Hey y'all, welcome back to Twin Oaks Family Farm in rural southeast Ohio, USA. I'm actually headed to the meat bird production barn, but I was taking a moment to admire the butterfly bush and take a look at it. We get a lot of butterflies and bees on here, and it's fun to watch the variety of them that we get. I'm gonna do a video for loading this week on our butterfly bush and some other butterfly attractors in your landscaping, some different plants we could use, and some considerations about that. But right now we do have to head to the meat bird production barn. I'm going to take you down there with me. So it is July 8th 2024, and I think that the birds are at about 27 days old. So we're going to head down here and take a look at this flock of meat chickens. If you have ever thought about raising animals, livestock animals, for meat production, chickens is one you can consider if you live in an area where you could do that and you have some resources to do that. And we actually have 427 Cornish short-cross meat chickens in this building. So you're going to see that. And the floor space that they have is actually just about 30 foot by 25 foot. So if you want to raise chickens, you can do that in a relatively small area. But we're just going to take a look at how things are going for them for the day, how they're looking this afternoon, and I'll let you know what I'm going to be doing in here. I'm sure I'll have to tend to some resources for them, and also let you know what we've got going on with temperatures around us and for them. But I'm just right now, as we walk up to the barn, kind of surveying, like, how are they looking, how are they doing, because here's what we know about temperature. Outdoor temperature is about 90 degrees Fahrenheit, and it's pretty accurate as far as real feel. It feels like what it is. So it feels like 91 degrees Fahrenheit. The humidity isn't terrible, so it's not as bad as like the last week has been. Really, it feels pretty good, but definitely warm. But it's nice that in a confined system like this, even though they are indoors and they're not out on pasture, which sometimes people prefer or think they would prefer, one advantage to this is that we don't have direct sunlight beating down on this flock of birds. Like if they were outdoors and had to be there beyond the gate panel, then they would be in direct sunlight, and you would have to do something in these kind of temperatures to provide shade for them. So ambient temperature is a big deal with meat birds. So if you do raise them or are going to raise them, kind of research and learn, what is their comfort level, what temperature do they really want it to be, and then how do we work with our resources to make them as comfortable as possible. And some of that may just be strategically timing when you raise them. Is there a way that you could start them when the temperatures are great for day old and then week old birds, and then time it so that the temperatures are cooling, and then at the end of production, when they're 5 weeks old or 6 weeks old, the temperatures might still be good for growing and finishing birds. So that's one way to look at it. Now in our instance, we're trying to raise about 1,600 birds over the calendar year, so we can't start them all at the same time and finish them all at the same time in the amount of space that we have here for them. So we have to break that up into several flocks. This year we happen to be breaking it up into about 6 flocks. They're not all the same size, but we've got some flocks of 400 and some flocks of 100 for the most part. That was how we broke the year up. So, we could have timed the the size of the flocks differently, but this building is set up to hold about 400 birds. And what you're seeing right now from this flock of birds is mostly that two things. They're in a resting phase, but also they're going to opt for a resting phase a greater part of the day than they normally would due to the ambient temperature. So they, with them being about 4 weeks old, they really want a temperature of probably about 70 degrees Fahrenheit. So where we're at 90 degrees Fahrenheit, that's about 20 degrees hotter than they want to be. And for a meat bird, that's a big, big deal. When it's 20 degrees hotter than they want to be, that is, you know, to them, it could be catastrophic, I guess, is what I want to say. It could be catastrophic. If we don't have some kind of measures in place to help augment their own coping mechanisms with heat, then that kind of heat actually could be immediately mortal to them. It could kill them. They really could just drop dead from overheating in that kind of heat. So two things to kind of add to that. I'll tell you what behaviors we're seeing in the flock that tells us they're using coping mechanisms, and I'll tell you what we're doing to augment their own coping mechanisms, and then I'll tell you what temperatures do they want it at the ages and stages. And you can take those temperature reference points as super reliable benchmarks for what temperatures we want to try to give our meat birds at the ages and stages of development. Okay, so we'll do that. And then after we finish talking about temperature, we will wrap up the video with a little bit of talk about bedding material and floor condition. Okay, so the first thing I said was going to talk about is what are these birds showing us that indicates to us they are feeling the heat, but they are utilizing coping mechanisms to deal with that heat. So let's look at some things, okay? So first of all, maybe here's a good example. Okay, we see some panting. That's normal when the temperature is 20 degrees hotter than a chicken wants it to be. The panting is definitely a normal thing to see. So that would be considered a normal coping mechanism. And that's helping the chicken to cope with that heat, okay? So now I'm looking for one that might be standing and showing us its wings spread out. But here, I'm going to show you this one. This is a good example, okay? Other than it being warmer than this bird wants it to be, this bird is not suffering, okay? Now, I want to explain to you what we're seeing in this bird and the one right behind it are normal coping mechanisms for birds that are experiencing high temperatures, okay? See how the one that's still propped there is propped up on one side, and we're seeing the exposed underbelly that doesn't have feathering. And that is precisely why that bird is laying like that. It wants to feel the moving air across its belly, and that helps that bird cool down, okay? And then even as it's standing, we can kind of see how it's holding its wings slightly away from its body. That's because it's not super feathered right underneath the wings. So holding those wings out, it's just like us being out on a hot day and sweaty in a sticky shirt, and we might hold our arms out away from our sides to just let air hit our arms as much as possible. They're doing the same thing, okay? They're holding their wings out, letting as much air hit their bodies as possible, okay? And a lot of them are positioning themselves where they are in front of significant airflow, okay? The other thing we're seeing, which is super good, is that we do see birds going to water, okay? We even see some birds eating. So when you see birds eating, you know that they are coping with the heat as best they can, okay? So what are we doing to augment the fact that yes, these birds are experiencing high temperatures and they're quite warm? See how that one's stretching, holding its wing out? And it's right in line with some moving air, okay? So it's getting that feel good from the air moving over it. But that's one of the main things we're doing to augment the fact that we know they're having to deal with high temperatures. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. It's in the back. I don't know if you can see it. There's a fan back there. There's another fan back there. That's 5. There's a white fan there. 6, 7, and this one here is 8. So 8 fans, okay? And yes, it's still warm, but it's warm outside, and that's why they're warm. And we have all the doors open. Now, we don't want to stress birds when temperatures are high, but when we're done recording, I'm actually going to walk through the pen and gently ask the birds to at least stand up and move around, take a few steps. First of all, we want to see, are they willing and able to move around? If we have a bird that's not willing and able to move around, we're going to assess what's going on there. Is that because of some high heat? Is that because of potential injury? Is that because of potential not feeling well? We need to find out why that's an issue if we have a bird not wanting to get up and move around a little bit. The other thing it'll do is if there's one that, or if there's many of them that have just decided to plop down and try to deal with coping with the high heat, maybe they haven't exerted themselves to go to water recently, we'll want to get those birds up, and that'll trigger them like, oh, if I need a drink of water, they'll go to water, okay? And then the other thing I will definitely be doing is checking waters. Like, for example, we have a lot of these 1-gallon waters in the pen. I can see from here there's still water in the tray, but they've used all the water that's in the reservoir. So we'll clean the tray, fill the reservoir, okay? And then same with these, we'll check the big ones. This one actually still has a lot of water in it. I'm gonna tell you a phenomena that you can't, of course, sense from the video, but when I lifted that lid off of there, there's actually some warmth coming up out of there because it's so warm. So what I'll end up doing is actually I'll fill these out of these big waters, and I'll make those low enough then by filling all these little waters that I can clean those trays out, and then I'll restock these with cool water from the hydrant, and actually just agitating the water will make it cool when it goes into there, and then putting cool water in there will help make sure that this water is fresh. So in that regard, we hope to encourage them to continue to go to water all around the chicken pen, okay? And we have 50 gallon of water down on the floor. So those are the main ways we're trying to augment their coping mechanisms to try to deal with the heat. We're providing 8 box fans. We have the doorway design that lets the barn be open on every side so we can maximize utilizing airflow, cross ventilation. And we're also providing ample water, and we're not just putting it in a few stations. It's water everywhere. There's little waters everywhere. Anywhere there's birds, we want them to be able to get to water. So actually some of their distribution throughout the pen has shifted a little bit. So like if I've got these 2 waters that haven't been used a lot today, but I've got a lot of birds over there, I'll probably go ahead and move these over there when I refill waters too. So those are ways we're augmenting their coping mechanisms for them to try to stay cooled off in this high heat of the day. And then as the day goes on, you know, the temperature's going to cool, and come nightfall, we're going to be in their comfort zone. But we're probably still going to leave the fans on, because at that point, we'll close up the barn to protect from predators overnight when we'd be more likely to maybe have a predator issue. And we'll want the fans on at that time too to continue the airflow, because here's the last thing that we need to talk about with augmenting their efforts to stay cooled off. How do we manage the floor? Because as birds manure on the floor and on the bedding material, first of all, their manure is heavy and wet. They're putting a lot of moisture onto the bedding. And this is why we have to, I gotta show you this. This is why we have to clean trays so often. This one was just like dust bathing, and as it might do it again. And as it's dust bathing, it was actually kicking bedding material into that tray. So we're constantly shifting those even slightly as we're cleaning them to try to work against that. But as we were saying about the flooring, as they're manuring on the bedding material, it's absorbing that heavy wet manure load. And basically the bedding material that's on top absorbs it. And once that bedding material that's on top starts to saturate and fill, it like seals off, so it's not letting that moisture go further down into the bedding. So knowing this, we can kind of use this to our advantage. So first off, when they're filling this top layer of bedding with chicken manure and it's getting heavy and getting saturated with their manure load, it's also simultaneously producing heat. And quite literally, just like when I showed you that I lifted the lid off the water and I said, you know, you can't feel this in the video, but I can feel there's just a little bit of a heat wave come up off of that water when I remove the lid coming up out of that water reservoir. And so it's good to agitate that water and get it to move a little, so it makes it cool down just a bit. And you can feel it do that, you know, when you agitate it and then restock it with cool, fresh water. So same thing kind of with the flooring. When we close this building up at night, even though we're going to keep fans on and we're going to have airflow, when we come out the next morning to open this building up, you literally get like this roll of heat a little bit out of the doorway, because all this flooring and the bedding material sitting on top of it is producing its own heat from that manure load that was being saturated into the bedding. And so overnight, with the barn closed up more, you know, that heat's rising, but it can't escape as much as it can escape when we have our big doors open, right? So, you know, so we notice that. So you can imagine where the birds are at on the floor, you know, they're living on that floor. So if there's heat coming off of it, they're naturally feeling that roll of heat. And if it's already 90 degrees out and we've got that heat building up, then, you know, that's compounding any heat that they're experiencing. So what would be the way around all this? Well, if we could have a totally temperature controlled building, we wouldn't have to deal with any of this, right? We'd have to be aware of the influences and change the thermostat, but we wouldn't have birds that have to use their natural coping mechanisms to deal with heat. We could just mitigate that and eliminate that for them. But as it is, we have a building that basically matches the outside ambient temperature. And even when it's closed up, we have good enough airflow that we don't get like an ammonia smell buildup, because, you know, we've got these gaps in the wall, the siding. So we've got a lot of airflow able to get out, and it's vented. The way the construction is, you know, up at the top in the peak, it's more or less vented out the ends, which you really can't necessarily see from here, but we still have a good airflow. And then in the daytime, when we can open it up, we have super ventilation in here. But, you know, it just emphasizes the point to be aware of, that most definitely when your temperatures climb outdoors, the birds are going to experience heat. And you've got to remember that if you're 5 foot tall, 6 foot tall, you're experiencing the ambient temperature up here. They aren't. They're experiencing the ambient temperature down here, okay? And that's why, like our fan placement, and this one's really, I don't know if you can see him in the camera. Yeah, there's a rooster. That's why he's propped up like that. But you can see, you know, his feathers blowing. He's getting air movement. He's actually not even panting. He's really actually getting some comfort right there, okay? So remember that, though, we're experiencing the temperature up here. They're experiencing it down here, all right? So if we don't have some kind of moving air at their level when temperatures are super hot, they may be actually experiencing more heat down here on the floor than we're experiencing standing up here where we are. So we have to remember that. And they don't sweat either. So we gotta remember that too. As long as we're well hydrated and we recognize that we're sweating, we know that we're okay heat-wise. They don't sweat at all, okay? So we still have to prioritize keeping them well hydrated, even if that means placing water everywhere, or even if that means going ahead and making them stand up and take a little walk so that they get triggered to go to the water. But one good thing about this flock, even though they've had to deal with heat, that I can say is they are drinking. Because like I said, we've got 50-gallon capacity down on the floor, and we're filling it about 3 times a day. You know, they're not emptying it during those times, but they're drinking it down, and we're filling it up for them about 3 times a day to make sure it's always topped off for them, okay? And that they always have access to water. So that's a key if you're dealing with chickens, especially meat chickens, in high heat, high temperatures. Keep the water to them and keep the water accessible, and prioritize making sure that they're going to the water, and then just keep giving it to them. Keep giving it to them. They've got to have the water, and naturally, the more water you give them, the more manure load they're going to have. And also keep in mind, before we start to wrap up, also keep in mind, when you have high heat, it is going to affect the quality and condition of the manure that the birds produce, okay? And that's for a couple of reasons. For one thing, they may not eat as much, so there just may not be as much solid stuff going into them in the same pattern or the same times of day. So, you know, if they go a long time during the daytime hours when it's hot, not eating a lot, and then they make up for it overnight, you're still going to possibly see some runny, loose manure in the daytime, because instead of eating, they may be overcompensating on water. So of course, if there's less solid going in but more water going in, most of the manure is just going to be runnier and less solid, right? And then the other kind of impact that's going to have is that's going to make it even harder to maintain the floor, because they're putting more liquid on it. So the last thing we do to augment the hot temperatures is we work really hard to either add more bedding or condition the bedding that's there, or do both. So like in the last week, we've put down about 11 bales of pine shavings throughout the entire space, okay? But the other thing that we've done is about 3 or 4 times a day, we just take a pitchfork and come through and fluff or turn all of the bedding throughout the pen. That is very time consuming. That makes your arms and shoulders tired, but it can be a lifesaver for our birds, because remember I said that moisture is saturating the top layer of the bedding. For example, like this bedding needs fluffed or turned. I don't know if you can tell it, but here's a place where bedding clumped up, bedding and manure all clumped up. So like I'll bring a pitchfork through and I'll dig in under there and I'll turn that, because as I get down into there, that's dry bedding. So that's what's amazing about chicken bedding. It takes like no time at all for the top layer. If you have a lot of birds, it takes no time at all for the top layer to go from looking really good to looking really soggy, but it's in the top layer. So if you can get underneath that, there's probably actually still dry bedding under there. So, you know, you can accomplish, if you turn the bedding or fluff it and get some of that lower bedding that has been, remember I said it seals the top layer off. As it absorbs moisture, it's kind of sealing off. So what that means is that the bedding underneath it is getting drier, or staying dry if it never really fully got saturated to start with. So if we can fluff it or turn it, we're accomplishing some good things for the birds. First of all, we're giving the bedding underneath them more cushion, which is good, because you don't want anything real hard or packed without something cushiony on top of it for your meat birds. We're also making it drier so it can absorb more, and we're mitigating the amount of heat that bedding produces that the birds are feeling. So those are all things we want to accomplish and create good outcomes for these meat chickens. So let me give you, I said I'd tell you ages and stages, what temperatures do they want to be. So like day one, if you order from a hatchery or buy them at the farm supply store and move hatchlings in, and remember they're going to be about the size of a chicken egg at that time, they need ambient temperatures of about 95 degrees Fahrenheit. By day 7, we want it to be ambient temperatures of about 90 degrees Fahrenheit. By day 14, we want ambient temperatures of about 85 degrees Fahrenheit. By day 21, we want ambient temperatures of 80 degrees Fahrenheit. And by day 28, we want temperatures of about 75 degrees Fahrenheit. And then by day 35, we want temperatures of 70 degrees Fahrenheit. They could even tolerate maybe down to 68 degrees or 65 degrees. And then that's where they want it. And then honestly, with your meat birds, you should be processing them at about 6 weeks of age. So that'd be day 42. So that would be as far out as you'd have to think with your temperature considerations. But basically, once you hit that 70 degree Fahrenheit threshold, then that 65 degree to 70 degree Fahrenheit threshold is where the birds want the ambient temperature. So obviously, even if they're pasture raised, even if they're in a confined setting like our production system, the temperature is probably never going to be exactly perfect, and we're going to have to do some things to work around that. Okay, so I think I covered the bases of what I said I would talk about. We were going to talk about this flock, the indicators that they're dealing with heat, some things we're doing to augment that, and we were going to talk about the temperatures they prefer at their ages and stages, and we were going to talk about the bedding material and the condition of the floor. So basically though, just condition of the floor, you want it dry and fluffy as much as possible, and adding new bedding over it frequently is generally the easiest way to accomplish that, but that also can add up a little bit on expense. So if you have the time, more so than you have extra money, you could take your pitchfork and some elbow grease and some sweat equity, and you can get in your chicken pen and you can condition that bedding multiple times a day and get a little more mileage out of it. But you know, if you have enough birds, fill in a space, you're probably going to have to just accept that adding more bedding is generally going to need to happen on a regular basis. So you know, that's something though that really can be very particular to the climate where you are, can be very particular to the base of your building. Like, are you dealing with concrete? Are you dealing with just dirt? Are you dealing with limestone screenings? So are you dealing with ground underneath the building that drains well? You know, if you have dirt in your floor, that's really going to be a consideration for you. Is the building well drained around it to start with? So as far as how your bedding is going to hold up and how your floor condition is going to hold up over like a flock's production, that's probably going to be pretty specific to your site and to your flocks and to the stocking density. So I don't know that anybody in a video could sit and say to you, here's exactly the formula for how you need to bed the building. But you need to be observing the condition of the bedding. The ideal is that we can keep it dry and fluffy. And so, you know, you can see it, like what it looks like when you put brand new pine shavings down compared to what it looks like as they use the bedding up, right? And so then you kind of know as the bedding is breaking down how much life you might have left in the bedding. So, you know, when we put new bedding down, it looks real dry, it looks light in color, real pale. So you can tell like where it's dark and where it starts to look moist, or where it even clumps together in places, that the bedding is getting maxed out, and that's probably when you would need to add more. So if you have any questions or comments, observations, put them down in comments. We love to read them and love to hear about your experience. Also love to hear new ideas and new suggestions. So if you have suggestions of other kinds of bedding material, alternatives to pine shavings bedding, let us know about that. We would love to hear about it. But this is a flock currently of 427 Cornish rock cross meat chickens that are about 4 weeks old, and they will go to be butchered and processed right at 6 weeks old. So Thanks for joining us on Twin Oaks Farm Poultry. We love to show you how real good chicken is made.